enough. Forget you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world today, you're now on the new way. On Steampunk Radio with two E's, which you're listening to on your TuneIn app, or by podcast, or by airwaves. After Lenny Time, I'm here with Mel from Amber's Place, and we're going to read to you the teachings of all ages, but only after we've warmed up with some AC/DC. rockin' with Thunderstruck by AC/DC. Today's Thursday morning on the New Way, and we have Mel here from Amber's Place, and she's going to be reading from Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. This is our 8th reading, I believe, and so
Ninth.
we are 9th. Okay, so we're well into the book now, and the to date has been pretty much a history of philosophy and followed by a history of ancient history, followed by a history of, well, it's microhistory almost. It's getting into topics that are breezed over in public school, and whereas public school might give us 2 or 3 minutes on a topic, now Manly Hall is giving us 20 or 30 pages on a topic. So I like the learning experience, and it's 100-year-old book, right?
Yes, it is. Very nearly 100 years. That's right. So for the listeners, sorry, I've got a complete.
Okay. Did I lose you? This is interesting. I heard something, and then all of a sudden it went blank. And so yeah, I think that she might need to pop in and pop out, but help, help. You never know what's going on in the new way because the new way is always new and it's way out there. And so sometimes what we have planned doesn't really come through as we have planned it. And so we're going to have to come up with something else. And somebody in our chat room can go back and see if they can attract the attention of our orator to let her know that somehow she's not orating on this channel right now. And in the meantime, I can orate because, I'm an orator too. And I've got the 4 Agreements by the Toltec wisdom god, Don Miguel Ruiz. And the book is dedicated to the Circle of Fire, those who have gone before, those who are present, and those who have yet to come. And so it was written in 1997, and this is pretty much the agreements to set the planet onto a new system instead of the old system. And so when we get to thinking about it, we'll start with the Toltec. Thousands of years ago, the Toltec were known throughout southern Mexico as women and men of knowledge. Anthropologists have spoken of the Toltec as a nation or a race, but in fact, the Toltec were scientists and artists who formed a society to explore and conserve the spiritual knowledge and practices of the ancient ones.
Can you
They
hear me
came.
now, Lenny?
Yes, I can hear you now. We can switch from Don Miguel Ruiz back to Manly P. Hall.
I am very sorry. I have absolutely no idea what just happened. I could hear you, but nobody could hear me. But it seems to be working again now.
Yep, and we're good.
Hopefully it will continue in the same vein. Okay, so as I was saying, you can find this text on sacredtext.com. Just search for Manly P. Hall or Secret Teachings of All Ages. We're actually beginning today on a chapter called Wonders of Antiquity. This is page 61 of the text. So, Wonders of Antiquity. It was a common practice among the early Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans to seal lighted lamps in the sepulchres of their dead as offerings to the god of death. Possibly it was also believed that the deceased could use these lights in finding his way through the valley of the shadow. Later, as the custom became generally established, not only actual lamps, but miniatures of them in terracotta were buried with the dead. Some of the lamps were enclosed in circular vessels for protection, and instances have been recorded in which the original oil was found in them, in a perfect state of preservation after more than 2,000 years. There is ample proof that many of these lamps were burning when the sepulchres were sealed, and it has been declared that they were still burning when the vaults were opened hundreds of years later. The possibility of preparing a fuel which would renew itself as rapidly as it was consumed has been a source of considerable controversy among medieval authors. After due consideration of the evidence at hand, it seems well within the range of possibility that the ancient priest-chemists did manufacture lamps that burned, if not indefinitely, at least for considerable periods of time. Numerous authorities have written on the subject of ever-burning lamps. W. Wynne Westcott estimates the number of writers who have given the subject consideration as more than 150, and H. P. Blavatsky as 173. While conclusions reached by different authors are at variance, a majority admit the existence of these phenomenal lamps. Only a few maintained that the lamps would burn forever, but many were willing to concede that they might remain alight for several centuries without replenishment of the fuel. Some considered the so-called perpetual lights as mere artifices of the crafty pagan priests, while a great many, admitting that the lamps actually burned, made the sweeping assertion that the devil was using this apparent miracle to ensnare the credulous and thereby lead their souls to perdition. On this subject, the learned Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, usually dependable, exhibits a striking inconsistency. In his Oedipus Aegyptiacus, he writes, "Not a few of these ever-burning lamps have been found to be the devices of devils. And I take it that all the lamps found in the tombs of the Gentiles, dedicated to the worship of certain gods, were of this kind, not because they burned, or have been reported to burn, with a perpetual flame, but because probably the devil set them there, maliciously intending thereby to obtain fresh credence for a false worship." Having admitted that dependable authorities defend the existence of the ever-burning lamps, and that even the devil lends himself to their manufacture, Kircher next declared the entire theory to be desperate and impossible, and to be classed with perpetual motion and the philosopher's stone. Having already solved the problem to his satisfaction once, Kircher solves it again, but differently, in the following words. In Egypt, there are rich deposits of asphalt and petroleum. What did these clever fellows, in brackets the priests, do, then, but connect an oil deposit by a secret duct with one or more lamps, provided with wicks of asbestos? How could such lamps help burning perpetually? In my opinion, this is the solution of the riddle of the supernatural everlastingness of these ancient lamps. Montfaucon, in his Antiquities, agrees in the main with the later deductions of Kircher, believing the fabled perpetual lamps of the temples to be cunning mechanical contrivances. He further adds that the belief that lamps burned indefinitely in tombs was the result of the noteworthy fact that in some cases fumes resembling smoke poured forth from the entrances of newly opened vaults. Parties going in later and discovering lamps scattered about the floor assumed that they were the source of the fumes. There are several interesting stories concerning the discoveries of ever-burning lamps in various parts of the world. In a tomb on the Appian Way, which was opened during the papacy of Paul III, was found a burning lamp which had remained alight in a hermetically sealed vault for nearly 1600 years. According to an account written by a contemporary, a body, that of a young and beautiful girl with long golden hair, was found floating in an unknown transparent liquid, and as well preserved as though death had occurred but a few hours before. About the interior of the vault were a number of significant objects, which included several lamps, one of them alight. Those entering the sepulchre declared that the draught caused by the opening of the door blew out the light, and the lamp could not be relighted. Kircher reproduces an epitaph, Tuliolae filiae mei, supposedly found in the tomb, but which Montfaucon declares never existed, the latter adding that although conclusive evidence was not found, the body was generally believed to be that of Tuliola, the daughter of Cicero. Ever-burning lamps have been discovered in all parts of the world. Not only the Mediterranean countries, but also India, Tibet, China, and South America have contributed records of lights which burned continuously without fuel. The examples which follow were selected at random from the imposing list of perpetual lamps found in different ages. Plutarch wrote of a lamp that burned over the door of a temple to Jupiter Ammon. The priests declared that it had remained alight for centuries without fuel. Saint Augustine described a perpetual lamp, guarded in a temple in Egypt sacred to Venus, which neither wind nor water could extinguish. He believed it to be the work of the devil. An ever-burning lamp was found at Edessa, or Antioch, during the reign of the Emperor Justinian. It was in a niche over the city gate, elaborately enclosed to protect it from the elements. The date upon it proved that the lamp had been burning for more than 500 years. It was destroyed by soldiers. During the early Middle Ages, a lamp was found in England, which had burned since the 3rd century after Christ. The monument containing it was believed to be the tomb of the father of Constantine the Great. The lantern of Pallas was discovered near Rome in AD 1401. It was found in the sepulchre of Pallas, son of Evander, immortalized by Virgil in his Aeneid. The lamp was placed at the head of the body and had burned with a steady glow for more than 2,000 years. In AD 1550, on the island of Nessus in the Bay of Naples, a magnificent marble vault was opened, in which was found a lamp still alight, which had been placed there before the beginning of the Christian era. Pausanias described a beautiful golden lamp in the temple of Minerva, which burned steadily for a year without refueling or having the wick trimmed. The ceremony of filling the lamp took place annually, and time was measured by the ceremony. According to the Fama Fraternitatis, the crypt of Christian Rosenkreutz, when opened 120 years after his death, was found to be brilliantly illuminated by a perpetual lamp suspended from the ceiling. Numa Pompilius, king of Rome and magician of considerable power, caused a perpetual light to burn in the dome of a temple he had created in honor of an elemental being. In England, a curious tomb was found. In England, a curious tomb was found containing an automaton which moved when certain stones in the floor of the vault were stepped upon by an intruder. At that time, the Rosicrucian controversy was at its height, so it was decided that the tomb was that of a Rosicrucian initiate. A countryman, discovering the tomb and entering, found the interior brilliantly lighted by a lamp hanging from the ceiling. As he walked, his weight depressed some of the floor stones. At once, a seated figure in heavy armour began to move. Mechanically, it rose to its feet and struck the lamp with an iron baton, completely destroying it, and thus effectually preventing the discovery of the secret substance which maintained the flame. How long the lamp had burned is unknown, but certainly it had been for a considerable number of years. It is related that among the tombs near Memphis and in the Brahmin temples of India, lights have been found in sealed chambers and vessels, but sudden exposure to the air has extinguished them and caused their fuel to evaporate. It is now believed that the wicks of these perpetual lamps were made of braided or woven asbestos, called by the alchemists salamander's wool, and that the fuel was one of the products of alchemical research. Kircher attempted to extract oil from asbestos, being convinced that as the substance itself was indestructible by fire, an oil extracted from it would supply the lamp with a fuel likewise indestructible. After spending 2 years in fruitless experimental work, he concluded that the task was impossible of accomplishment. Several formulae for the making of the fuel for the lamps have been preserved. In Isis Unveiled, H. P. Blavatsky reprints 2 of these formulae from early authors, Trittenheim and Bartolomeo Korndorff. One will suffice to give a general understanding of the process. Sulfur, alum, ust, that's UST, and is a strange character I can't decipher here. Sublime them into flowers, to again this strange character, of which add of crystalline Venetian borax, powdered. Upon these effuse high rectified spirit of wine, and digest it. Then abstract it and pour on fresh. Repeat this so often till the sulphur melts like wax, without any smoke. Upon a hot plate of brass. This is for the pabulum, but the wick is to be prepared after this manner. Gather the threads or thrums of the lapis asbestos to the thickness of your middle and the length of your little finger. Then put them into a Venetian glass, and covering them over with the aforesaid depurated sulphur or aliment, set the glass in sand for the space of 24 hours, so hot that the sulphur may bubble all the while. The wick, being thus besmeared and anointed, is to be put into a glass like a scallop shell, in such manner that some part of it may lie above the mass of prepared sulphur. Then, setting this glass upon hot sand, you must melt the sulphur so that it may lay hold of the wick. And when it is lighted, it will burn with a perpetual flame, and you may set this lamp in any place where you please. Okay, so the next section is the Greek oracles, so that might be a good place to stop and talk about these perpetual lamps. Lenny, you're the chemist. What do you think?
I was thinking that the perpetual lamps have either 3 explanations. One is that the Egyptians had electricity and they were lights, and that the flames were just false flames like we have now on some of the false fireplaces. The second thing I thought about was, in order to burn continuously, they'd need a non-consumable fuel, something that was continually there and burning but not transforming so it could burn again and again. And then I started thinking, well, if that's the case, it would have to be an immediate reversible reaction. Something, well, to get a flame, you need 3 things. You need your substrate, you need an oxidant like air that provides the oxygen to get things going, and you need a spark to induce it so it gets set off. And ancient cultures have often had fire where they had cases to carry around coals that they kept alive so that they never lost their fire and could always build it at some different place. And it was a high honor to be the coal carrier who was responsible for keeping the fire going. So I tend to think that maybe it was the electricity and that the pyramids seem to be electrical generators. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all to find that the lights were perpetual because of electric, but because people didn't know electric even existed, they made the flames just a thing for people to see.
Well, what did you think about this recipe for making these lamps? Using sulfur, alum, crystalline Venetian borax, wine, and asbestos.
Component wise, everything is there that you need for burning. But again, how it comes to be perpetual has to be a regeneration of the fuel or a different mechanism for providing the light.
Mm. Very interesting. I'd never heard of these lamps. So this is fascinating, especially as some have been found in England as well. Okay, right. So if we go on to the Greek oracles. The worship of Apollo included the establishment and maintenance of places of prophecy, by means of which the gods could communicate with mankind and reveal futurity, that's Futurity, to such as deserved the boon. The early history of Greece abounds with accounts of talking trees, rivers, statues, and caves in which nymphs, dryads, or daemons had taken up their abodes and from which they delivered oracles. While Christian authors have tried to prove that oracular revelations were delivered by the devil for the purpose of misleading humanity, they have not dared to attack the theory of oracles because of the repeated reference to it in their own sacred writings. If the onyx stones on the shoulders of Israel's high priest made known by their flashings the will of Jehovah, then a black dove, temporarily endowed with the faculty of speech, could indeed pronounce oracles in the temple of Jupiter Ammon. If the witch of Endor could invoke the shade of Samuel, who in turn gave prophecies to Saul, could not a priestess of Apollo call up the spectre of her liege to foretell the destiny of Greece? The most famous oracles of antiquity were those of Delphi, Dodona, Trophonius, and Latona, of which the talking oak trees of Dodona were the oldest. Though it is impossible to trace back to the genesis of the theory of oracular prophecy, it is known that many other caves and fissures set aside by the Greeks as oracles were sacred long before the rise of Greek culture. The oracle of Apollo at Delphi remains one of the unsolved mysteries of the ancients. Alexander Wilder derives the name Delphi from Delphos, the womb. This name was chosen by the Greeks because of the shape of the cavern and the vent leading into the depths of the earth. The original name of the oracle was Pytho, so called because its chambers had been the abode of the great serpent Python, a fearsome creature that had crept out of the slime left by the receding flood that had destroyed all human beings except Deucalion and Pyrrha, that's Pyrrha. Apollo, climbing the side of the Mount Parnassus, slew the serpent after a prolonged combat and threw the body down the fissure of the oracle. From that time, the sun god, surnamed the Pythian Apollo, gave oracles from the vent. With Dionysus, he shared the honor of being the patron god of Delphi. After being vanquished by Apollo, the spirit of Python remained at Delphi as the representative of his conqueror, and it was with the aid of his effluvium that the priestess was able to become en rapport with the god. The fumes rising from the fissure of the oracle were supposed to come from the decaying body of Python. The name Pythoness or Pythia, given to the female hierophant of the oracle, means literally one who has been thrown into a religious frenzy by inhaling fumes rising from decomposing matter. It is of further interest to note that the Greeks believed the oracle of Delphi to be the umbilicus of the earth, thus proving that they considered the planet an immense human being. The connection between the principle of oracular revelation and the occult significance of the navel is an important secret belonging to the ancient mysteries. The oracle, however, is much older than the foregoing account indicates. A story of this kind was probably invented by the priests to explain the phenomena to those inquisitive persons whom they did not consider worthy of enlightenment regarding the true esoteric nature of the oracle. Some believe that the Delphic fissure was discovered by a Hyperborean priest, but as far back as recorded history goes, the cave was sacred, and persons came from all parts of Greece and the surrounding countries to question the daemon who dwelt in its chimney-like vent. Priests and priestesses guarded it closely and served the spirit who dwelt therein, and who enlightened humanity through the gift of prophecy. The story of the original discovery of the oracle is somewhat as follows. Shepherds tending their flocks on the side of Mount Parnassus were amazed at the peculiar antics of goats that wandered close to a great chasm on its southwestern spur. The animals jumped about as though trying to dance and emitted strange cries unlike anything before heard. At last, one of the shepherds, curious to learn the cause of the phenomenon, approached the vent, from which were rising noxious fumes. Immediately he was seized with a prophetic ecstasy. He danced with wild abandon, sang, jabbered inarticulate sounds, and foretold future events. Others went close to the fissure with the same result. The fame of the place spread, and many came to learn of the future by inhaling the mephitic fumes, which exhilarated to the verge of delirium. Some of those who came, being unable to control themselves and having temporarily the strength of madmen, tore themselves from those seeking to restrain them and, jumping into the vent, perished. In order to prevent others from doing likewise, a wall was erected around the fissure, and a prophetess was appointed to act as mediator between the oracle and those who came to question it. According to later authorities, a tripod of gold, ornamented with carvings of Apollo in the form of Python, the great serpent, was placed over the cleft, and on this was arranged a specially prepared seat, so constructed that a person would have difficulty in falling off while under the influence of the oracular fumes. Just before this time, a story had been circulated that the fumes of the oracle arose from the decaying body of Python. It is possible that the oracle revealed its own origin. For many centuries during its early history, virgin maidens were consecrated to the service of the oracle. They were called the Thebaides, or Pythiae, and constituted that famous order now known as the Pythian priesthood. It is probable that women were chosen to receive the oracles because their sensitive and emotional nature responded more quickly and completely to the fumes of enthusiasm. 3 days before the time set to receive the communications from Apollo, the virgin priestess began the ceremony of purification. She bathed in the Castalian well, abstained from all food, drank only from the fountain of Cassotis, which was brought into the temple through concealed pipes, and just before mounting the tripod, she chewed a few leaves of the sacred bay tree. It has been said that the water was drugged to bring on distorted visions, or the priests of Delphi were able to manufacture an exhilarating and intoxicating gas, which they conducted by subterranean ducts and released into the shaft of the oracle several feet below the surface. Neither of these theories has been proved, however, nor does either in any way explain the accuracy of the predictions. When the young prophetess had completed the process of purification, she was clothed in sanctified raiment and led to the tripod, upon which she seated herself, surrounded by the noxious vapours rising from the yawning fissure. Gradually, as she inhaled the fumes, a change came over her. It was as if a different spirit had entered her body. She struggled, tore her clothing, and uttered inarticulate cries. After a time, her struggles ceased. Upon becoming calm, a great majesty seemed to possess her, and with eyes fixed on space and body rigid, she uttered the prophetic words. The predictions were usually in the form of hexameter verse, but the words were often ambiguous and sometimes unintelligible. Every sound that she made, every motion of her body was carefully recorded by the 5 Holsi, or holy men, who were appointed as scribes to preserve the minutest details of each divination. The Holsi were appointed for life and were chosen from the direct descendants of Deucalion. After the oracle was delivered, the Pythia began to struggle again, and the spirit released her. She was then carried or supported to a chamber of rest, where she remained till the nervous ecstasy had passed away. Iamblichus, in his dissertation on the mysteries, describes how the spirit of the oracle, a fiery daemon, even Apollo himself, took control of the Pythoness and manifested through her. But the prophetess in Delphi, whether she gives oracles to mankind through an attenuated and fiery spirit, bursting from the mouth of the cavern, or whether being seated in the adytum on a brazen tripod, or on a stool with 4 feet, she becomes sacred to the god. Whichsoever of these is the case, she entirely gives herself up to a divine spirit, and is illuminated with a ray of divine fire. And when, indeed, fire ascending from the mouth of the cavern circularly invests her in collected abundance, she becomes filled from it with a divine splendour. And when she places herself on the seat of a god, she becomes co-adapted to his stable prophetic power, and from both of these preparatory operations, she becomes wholly possessed by the god. And then, indeed, he is present with her, and illuminates her in a separate manner, and is different from the fire, the spirit, the proper seat, and, in short, from all the visible apparatus of the place, whether physical or sacred. Among the celebrities who visited the Oracle of Delphi were the immortal Apollonius of Tyana and his disciple Damis. He made his offerings, and after being crowned with a laurel wreath and given a branch of the same plant to carry in his hand, he passed behind the statue of Apollo, which stood before the entrance to the cave, and descended into the sacred place of the oracle. The priestess was also crowned with laurel, and her head bound with a band of white wool. Apollonius asked the oracle if his name would be remembered by future generations. The Pythoness answered in the affirmative, but declared that it would always be calumniated. Apollonius left the cavern in anger, but time has proved the accuracy of the prediction, for the early church fathers perpetuated the name of Apollonius as the Antichrist. The messages given by the virgin prophetess were turned over to the philosophers of the oracle, whose duty it was to interpret and apply them. The communications were then delivered to the poets, who immediately translated them into odes and lyrics, setting forth in exquisite form the statements supposedly made by Apollo and making them available for the populace. Serpents were much in evidence at the Oracle of Delphi. The base of the tripod upon which the Pythia sat was formed of the twisted bodies of 3 gigantic snakes. According to some authorities, one of the processes used to produce the prophetic ecstasy was to force the young priestess to gaze into the eyes of a serpent. Fascinated and hypnotized, she then spoke with the voice of a god. Although the early Pythian priestesses were always maidens, some still in their teens, a law was later enacted that only women past 50 years of age should be the mouthpiece of the oracle. These older women dressed as young girls and went through the same ceremonial as the first Pythiae. The change was probably the indirect result of a series of assaults made upon the persons of the priestesses by the profane. During the early history of the Delphian oracle, the god spoke only at each 7th birthday of Apollo. As time went on, however, the demand became so great that the Pythia were forced to seat herself upon the tripod every month. The times selected for the consultation and the questions to be asked were determined by lot or by vote of the inhabitants of Delphi. It is generally admitted that the effect of the Delphian oracle upon Greek culture was profoundly constructive. James Gardner sums up its influence in the following words. Its responses revealed many a tyrant and foretold his fate. Through its means, many an unhappy being was saved from destruction, and many a perplexed mortal guided in the right way. It encouraged useful institutions and promoted the progress of useful discoveries. Its moral influence was on the side of virtue, and its political influence in favour of the advancement of civil liberty. The oracle of Dodona was presided over by Jupiter, who uttered prophecies through oak trees, birds, and vases of brass. Many writers have noted the similarities between the rituals of Dodona and those of the Druid priests of Britain and Gaul. The famous oracular dove of Dodona, alighting upon the branches of the sacred oaks, not only discoursed at length in the Greek tongue upon philosophy and religion, but also answered the queries of those who came from distant places to consult it. The talking trees stood together, forming a sacred grove. When the priests desired answers to important questions, after careful and solemn purifications, they retired to the grove. They then accosted the trees, beseeching a reply from the god who dwelt therein. When they had stated their questions, the trees spoke with the voices of human beings, revealing to the priests the desired information. Some assert that there was but one tree which spoke, an oak or a beech standing in the very heart of the ancient grove. Because Jupiter was believed to inhabit this tree, he was sometimes called Phigonius, or one who lives in a beech tree. Most curious of the oracles of Dodona were the talking vases or kettles. These were made of brass and so carefully fashioned that when struck, they gave off sound for hours. Some writers have described a row of these vases and have declared that if one of them was struck, its vibrations would be communicated to all of the others, and a terrifying din ensue. Other authors describe a large single vase standing upon a pillar, near which stood another column supporting the statue of a child holding a whip. At the end of the whip were a number of swinging cords tipped with small metal balls, and the wind, which blew incessantly through the open building, caused the balls to strike against the bars. The number and intensity of the impacts and the reverberations of the bars were all carefully noted, and the priests delivered their oracles accordingly. When the original priests of Dodona, the Stelloi, mysteriously vanished, the oracle was served for many centuries by 3 priestesses who interpreted the vases and at midnight interrogated the sacred trees. The patrons of the oracles were expected to bring offerings and to make contributions. Another remarkable oracle was the cave of Trophonius, which stood upon the side of a hill with an entrance so small that it seemed impossible for a human being to enter. After the consultant had made his offering at the statue of Trophonius and had donned the sanctified garments, he climbed the hill to the cave, carrying in one hand a cake of honey. Sitting down at the edge of the opening, he lowered his feet into the cavern. Thereupon his entire body was precipitately drawn into the cave, which was described by those who had entered it as having only the dimensions of a fair-sized oven. When the oracle had completed his revelation, the consultant, usually delirious, was forcibly ejected from the cave, feet foremost. Near the cave of the oracle, two fountains bubbled out of the earth within a few feet of each other. Those about to enter the cave drank first from these fountains, the waters of which seemed to possess peculiar occult properties. The first contained the water of forgetfulness, and all who drank thereof forgot their earthly sorrows. From the second fountain flowed the sacred water of mnemosyne, or remembrance, for later it enabled those who partook of it to recall their experiences while in the cave. Though its entrance was marked by two brass obelisks, the cave, surrounded by a wall of white stones and concealed in the heart of a grove of sacred trees, did not present an imposing appearance. There is no doubt that those entering it passed through strange experiences, for they were obliged to leave at the adjacent temple a complete account of what they saw and heard while in the oracle. The prophecies were given in the form of dreams and visions, and were accompanied by severe pains in the head. Some never completely recovered from the after effects of their delirium. The confused recital of their experiences was interpreted by the priests according to the question to be answered. While the priests probably used some unknown herb to produce the dreams or visions of the cavern, their skill in interpreting them bordered on the supernatural. Before consulting the oracle, it was necessary to offer a ram to the daemon of the cave, and the priest decided by hieromancy whether the time chosen was propitious, and the sacrifice was satisfactory. Okay, so that's the end of that section. Would anyone like to comment? I just have to step away from the computer for a couple minutes.
Okay, I can take up the comment stream. Unfortunately, I was not listening to the story about the oracle. I was in my own little world figuring out something that I got triggered with from the previous discussion, and I made a revelation in the Fibonacci time sequence. And so if we look at 2012 as the midpoint from the 1986 cosmic convergence to the 2030 ultimate date, that's the window of error bar around the December 21st, 2012 date. So if you take from there the start of a new timeline, 2013 would be the first year, and 2014 would be the first year. 2015 and 2016 would be the second years. 2017, 2018, and 2019 would be the third year, and 2020 through 2024 would be the fifth year. 2025 through 2032 is the eighth year, and in Fibonacci sequence, that takes us up through 2030. So by the time we get to the year 2032 and have gone through the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps of Fibonacci, we won't really be in the new age, but it's a transition. Now, if you take that 2030 date that I mentioned as being the end of the window, and you count Fibonacci backwards from there the same way, then 2030 which you have up the whole year until December, because December 21st is essentially the next year. 10 days is well within the bar of error on a 365-day calendar year. But if you go backwards, you get 2030 and 2029 as year one. 2030 is year one. 2029 is year one. 2028 and 2027 makes year two. 2026, 2025, and 2024 make year three. And 2023, 2022, 2021, 2020, and 2019 make up year five. So we have just moved from 2018 to 2019 three months ago, because this is the end of March. So we are now progressing on the descending timeline at the fractal of 5, and the ascending timeline is at the fractal of 3. And next year, 2020, is when the ascending gets to 5 also. And having two fractals of 5 going in different directions on the timeline means that the changes that are expressed during those times will each create a new fractal that is a transformational change of reality. And if I'm not mistaken, the number 13 representing the zodiac is a fractal, and 12 is the number of constellations in the zodiac, and 13 is the sum of the whole. And so there is a void there, that sum of the whole, and the matter energy thing just fit with the Fibonacci mathematics, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the oracle, but she foresaw it, I'm sure. Welcome back, Mel. I hadn't been listening to the last portion of the story, so instead I explained to the audience a theory that I came up with on the basis of time and Fibonacci, and I like it well enough that I'm going to play with it some more. But nobody commented on the oracle.
Okay. Should I continue?
Did you have a comment on the oracle, on what you see as it?
Yes. I've heard of it all called Delphi, but I knew nothing about it. So it's very interesting to find out more about it. It's interesting about these noxious fumes. I mean, I'm just thinking of volcanic vents, perhaps, but that doesn't explain the other oracles where you have talking trees, etc. I came across
Noxious fumes, byproduct of the electricity that's generating the light.
Well, it didn't mention that these had perpetual lights associated with them. But
Okay.
then you had talking trees and talking birds and talking vases. I'm not sure. It reminds me of a video I came across recently on, you get your suggested list on YouTube, and it was describing how a famous case where a man went to, is it Lourdes? That pool in Lourdes in France that's supposed to have miraculous healing properties. It's a Christian place. And he went and it healed his tumor. Not only did it heal his inoperable and incurable tumor on his hip bone, which had completely degraded the hip joint. This was quite a while ago, before there were hip replacements. But after that, it can't have been that long ago because they were taking x-rays. But after that, the hip itself completely regenerated to brand new over a period of time. And there were sequences of x-rays taken over months after before, obviously, his treat during his long decline, and then after visiting the place and the healing that occurred. And I found that fascinating as well. There seem to be places in the world that actually do have these miraculous healing or prophetic properties associated with them. I just find it fascinating. I have no idea how it works, but it would make sense to me that this oracle, where the priestess inhaled some unknown fumes that put her into a trance state, at which point she could be possessed. I know that has a negative connotation, but it's basically channeling by a spirit, consciousness, in order to give the prophecies. That does make sense to me. It's just very interesting. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah, we can have modern explanations for what's going on that fit those actions, but unless we can visually teleport ourselves there to see what was going on, we're missing a lot of the dynamics that were in play just by not being immersed in the environment.
Yes. Yeah. It was interesting where it said that part of the purification ritual for these priestesses was fasting. Because I've heard that that is related to Kundalini awakenings, to do with what's called, I've heard called the sacred egg, going down the sacred fluid of the spine, and then coming back up and activating the pineal gland, I believe. I think fasting is associated with that procedure as well.
I know that when I do fasting, personally, I have lots of water and I tend to put lemon in the water just so that I have that little bit of vitamin C to carry me through and things.
Mm,
But I can't fast for a long length of time because I have blood sugar problems. And if
right.
my blood sugar drops during a fast, there's no way of getting it back up to where it needs to be. So I don't play with that as part of my routine anymore. I do cleanses, but since I've started drinking distilled water and not drinking any tap water at all, only natural water, I'm I'm tempted to start drinking the river water, to start accommodating myself to that water so that when it comes the time that we no longer have pumped flowing water, my body's already accommodated biologically to drinking the river water. But I'm
Mm,
not going to start doing that until I've committed to being here in this location for a longer period of time. I've been here now 3 years, and the timing is pretty good for me to stay, but it's also at the point where I have some things I need to accomplish, and they're not going to get accomplished by staying in my nice, cozy place and settling down for the rest of my life. So I have to make some decisions coming up, and it should be entertaining because the decision making process right now is collect information and wait, because there's so much going on in the world and it's a very unsettled place. So
mm.
until we can see clearly from our ground state what's happening in the excited state, I'm not going to make any sudden movements. It's all a slow motion thing. But you're into quantum healing, and I know about quantum jumping. And I think if we combine quantum healing and quantum jumping together, that might be something that allows us to change the dynamics of the reality that we have to deal with, but doing it on a human scale level. So instead of reading more of Manly Hall, can you maybe take 15 minutes or so to explain quantum healing to our listeners?
Certainly. Quantum healing it was developed by somebody called Dolores Cannon. If you go onto YouTube and search for her, you'll find a multitude of recordings of her talks. Excuse me, explaining the process of what she developed and how it came about. But in summary, she was a hypnotherapist, I believe, and she by accident at first, developed a technique that enabled many of our clients to go into a deeper state of hypnosis than is usual. And as she was perfecting this, because she found that deeper healing could occur from trauma, etc., for the clients, that she found that many of them would start to channel other entities who were claimed to be parts of the person's higher self, i.e. their soul, or the collective of consciousness of which they were a part. And she developed this technique over many years and taught it to many people before she died. And that is now known as QHHT, a form of quantum healing. After she died, there was another version headed by Candace Goldman, who that group believed that it should be more flexible than Dolores believed. So now you have another form of quantum healing called beyond quantum healing. Beyond quantum healing differs from QHHT only in that it is more looser in what practitioners can integrate into it. So different modalities and to do it in different ways. For example, Dolores Cannon forbade her students from conducting ceremonies by distance, whereas beyond quantum healing, it's acceptable to do it by distance. And so quantum healing in general is enabling somebody to, or helping them to descend into a deeper trance-like state, a different brainwave state, deeper than normal meditation, so that they can access things like past life memories or other life memories, because they're not always past. They sometimes can be concurrent or future ones. And also to get answers from their guides, their higher self, about their questions, and sometimes to be able to channel those entities. And so it can, during that process, healing can occur, not only emotional healing, simply from finding answers as to why my life is as it is, but actual physical healing from the guides or God, whatever you want to believe, that is part of their higher self. And so people have found that chronic, long-standing health conditions will miraculously disappear afterwards, for example. Now, that's not a guarantee, it doesn't always happen, but it's going to be healing either way, because what you experience will teach you much about the nature of reality and also your own life experiences. So you can do it by distance or you can do it in person. If you prefer it in person, I probably find a QHHT practitioner. If you are happy with being done over the internet and recorded, for example, then find a BQH practitioner. And there's many practitioners now you can find online, and locally as well. And there is a website, I think it's called quantumhealers.com. It's run by Candace Goldman, and there's a directory on there where you can search for practitioners, not only quantum healing practitioners of all types, but many other modalities, who are practicing locally or anywhere in the world, and get in contact with them that way. But I also am a qualified quantum healer and beyond quantum healing, and I offer free sessions to people who are suitable. There are certain criteria. So if anyone would be interested in a session, they can contact me via my YouTube channel, Amber's Place, or on Discord, Amber72, or just find me on Facebook. On Facebook, my name is Melanie Gallagher, and in Plymouth, the UK. and we can organize something. So that's quantum healing. I hope that helps.
I think it helps a bit. I also think that there's something in the pattern of time as we believe it that is counter what we've been taught, and that I'm thinking now that some of these past timelines might be places that we are going to in the future as opposed to having lived already in the past. And the reason I suppose that is because the dynamics of the reveal coming out now on the nature of Tartaria is so new, but it puts pieces of the puzzle together in such ways that the stack doesn't seem right. And it's like, if you're a student of history, certain ideas came from different ages. And we, Dennis, as a philosopher, can distinctly tell if it's Greek or if it's Roman, for instance. But most people who have just a superficial basis of knowing history wouldn't be able to tell a Greek from a Roman except until you mention the name and they can say, oh, Heracles, he's obviously Greek. Or, I mean, it takes a lot of associations, and the associations that we've built up in modern society aren't correct to the associations of true history because it's been hidden between what we've had presented in schools as history. And so a story like the Oracle of the Delphi and what it is and what it's about, um, would you maybe analogize that television is an oracle of a Delphi and has been teaching people to be incumbent on what it's going to tell them, so much so that the society now functions in a world created by television 30, 40 years ago, and that's the motif that everybody acts because it was exposed to the general populace in a certain way. And now that that is breaking down badly and seriously, the next rendition is to teach us to go into space. And so we're starting to see stuff that comes out, ancient aliens and other things, Zachariah Sitchin and that. And it's now morphed into where enough people have seen Star Wars, The Men in Black, Star Trek, or that, okay with the concept that there can be humans in space. So the morphogenic field is going to shift when the director says, cut, that's a wrap. And then we all get into Star Trek costumes and have Scotty beam us up, and we go off on the next adventure. And then those of us who are in the living earth who know that isn't true and it's just a fairy tale have suddenly lost 80% of the population because they left the planet voluntarily. And then the living earth can shine. And so it's a mechanism to get between different timelines. And if we're stuck in the Groundhog's Day loop and we can't get into the forward timeline, maybe our individual futures lie in past timelines, bringing what we know of today into those times so that if we know the pyramid was a giant capacitor that was used to generate electricity and 100,000 people from modern times end up in ancient Egypt working on the problem of how that was done with their knowledge combined with our knowledge, that's how history advances.
Interesting.
It's the context of Manly P. Hall to see things in a different light and realize he's talking about the same things, just in a different perspective. And when he wrote that book, there was no television, there was no cars were there, but very only the very, very rich had cars, and everybody was still mostly riding horses. So the distance of travel that you could get in your lifetime, unless you were really an extraordinary person, you never got out of your own domain. And so things are not what they seem, but same as it ever was. And I think we're starting to put pieces together of how that contrast mixes itself.
Well, with the Mandela effect, it wouldn't surprise me if we soon start seeing televisions referenced in the Bible. So who knows? It might end up that many people was watching television.
Or that Manly P. Hall was here now and already went through this and went back and wrote his stuff knowing we're going to go through it again at some point in the future history, because it's a loop until you get to a strange attractor. But in chaos theory, these strange attractors exist and they break things out of the loop, and they're one-time occurrences that put you into a different loop. And so if we take the Mayan calendar and the 13 different calendars that are embedded like Russian dolls within each other, and we know the two smallest are both affected, and they are the Tzolk'in, the 260-day cycle, and the 364 13 moon 28-day cycle. Those two cycles were definitely affected. The 26,000-year cycle that I talk about, that Wilcock demonstrated, is definitely one of those cycles of activity, and it seems like there ought to be two more cycles that are major league affected with what I consider to be either quantum growth or quantum shrinkage. And those are both Fibonacci denominated things where one timeline is going out, 11 timelines are rotating, and a new timeline is coming in to replace the one going out, because the 26,000-year cycle is triggered by a strange attractor event. That strange attractor event it's an instantaneous event, but on 26,000 years, the window of error bars doesn't even exist until you get about 30 years. So they say that the cosmic convergence in 1986 started the beginning of the event that took place on December 21st, 2012, and that calculates to the end of the period being sometime in 2030, hence Agenda 2030 from the United Nations. And half the players know this because they've got the information, but we the people only have different parts of the information, and we've got to put it together in different perspectives. And it seems to me that working on the problem of time travel is going to be invented imminently. Exactly when it's invented, I don't know. But once it's invented, most people go back in time. A few of us will not go back in time and will be on this planet that I call living Earth. But most of the people who were on the planet that was destined to be the Armageddon planet that went into the Mad Max futuristic scenario of all the movies, that time has left our picture of living Earth, but not left the picture of space. And so all those three pictures are still intertwined on the same Earths. But if the calculation that I just did is correct, this year is the last year of the ascending three. And if it's the last year of the ascending three, that's going to introduce two more discrete timelines in 2020. And we know that 2020 was also a big year that they were ramping up to. And that's the Strauss and Howe year that was predicted, where the great champion changes everything and we go into a different reality based on the Strauss and Howe 80-year cycles. But as you start reading history and you're looking for these cycles, there's cycles upon cycles upon cycles because nature is cycles. That's what fractal nature is. So I think we're in an incubator now, and I think we're in Groundhog's Day, the movie, and that we're going in a time loop and spending the same time running into the wall until time travel is invented. And once time travel is invented, it doesn't matter when it's invented, it changes the rules of the game. So guess what? We just invented time travel here in the new way. I was out yesterday and I went on a mission to the big city to get reestablished with a whole bunch of things. And it's definitely a different world out there. So I know that I'm not in the same time that I always was, but I'm still the time I had been. And so I'm the same time I'll ever be, but I can see different timelines coming in and coming out. And the time constant that we live on is something we need to figure out how to calculate. And I don't know if this will work, but you know how I know in the United States, in order to track time in seconds, when I was a child, I used to count Mississippis. So it would be like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. And as long as I kept my counter going, if I could get to 60 Mississippi, that was a minute. And I got to my internal time clock that I knew what a minute was by counting the number of Mississippis. I haven't done it in a long time, but I could pattern myself to count Mississippis and see how many seconds it takes me to get to 60 Mississippis. And if it takes me 60 seconds to get to 60 Mississippis, then I'm on the same constant that I always was. But if it takes me 72 seconds to get to 60-second Mississippis, that means that I'm on a world that is spinning faster because it's smaller. And if I only get to 48 Mississippis, it means that I'm on a larger world and it's spinning slower. And that's the relationship of the different terras that Dale Dufay describes as his observation of the Mandela effect. So we've got it to the point now where I'm listening to SMQAI talk about his CIA documents, and they're dumping a lot of information on us real quick in a way that allows people who are intelligent to find their own rabbit holes. And this would be the perfect mechanism for getting people trained to hit that point of time where we get to time travel and they can say, oh, wow, I'll go to ancient Egypt, and poof, they're there. But the trick is, that's where the rest of their life is going to be spent. Whether it's in the same body as an individual or not, I don't know, but it's the mind and the consciousness that travel. And it seems like time travel is a mechanism of mind that we limited ourselves by Einstein's theory of relativity, telling us it couldn't be done. Meanwhile, knowing that it could be done and that the theory of relativity was just a shrinkage of a lot of information into a general terminology that could be spun a different way while they hid information to bring out for resale based on the corporate economy that they hijack the system with. So if we can get rid of the monetary system and the corporate system and that and come at it from human scale and design systems to replace the systems that exist, not by trying to take away those systems, but by attempting to recreate systems that are there to replace a system as soon as it goes down, we have the ability to do that. And meanwhile, people are going to go back in history and change the history from this time so that by the time the history rolls around the next time, which is 2,000 years, the people are armed with better tools to not have to go through the suffering that people went through in the second half of the 20th century and up to today, because corporate scale doesn't acknowledge human scale and suffering doesn't happen on corporate scale. Once a corporation folds, it's gone and its remnants are eaten by vultures. And so the liability that the corporation has taken on is indemnified in the governance system, and that just can't be. And on a living earth, it won't be, because the living earth's rights have to supersede human rights. And so coming up with a constitution for a living earth that constitutes how to deal with different intelligences of every different size, scale, and modality ought to be our direction of working, so that if by chance some advanced alien does come, we demonstrate enough reasonable intelligence that they'll take us on as a worthwhile project. Because right now, the idea of spraying chemtrails all over the place and terraforming the earth is not for the population of we the people. But then we've been brainwashed by the school system to think that we the people means a classification of people identifying themselves as Americans, when corporate United States has absolutely nothing to do with the United States of America as originally conceived. So the history that we have was written by different people, and the current history is that Manly Hall has a reveal on some of the history that we haven't heard, that was history that our predecessors knew and wrote down and taught to each other. And yet we haven't heard it, and Amazon and Google know that they are the purveyors of knowledge, and anything that we know has to come through them. This is the new way on Steampunk Radio. I'm Dr. Lenny Time, and I want to remind the listeners that this is a crypto fiction, and Dr. Lenny Time is ranting in character, and that what is believed in the world of science and what is believed in the world of scientism are two entirely different tracts that need to be teased away from each other in order to grok an understanding of how life is. But it's everything that we know that has to be questioned, and some of it is true, and some of it's not true, and to base true on something that's not true can't be true. And so we have to tease our way back and forth between true and false, not knowing the answer, but trying to build a foundation on only stuff we know is true, and then editing it out when we find that it's false. But that's the way we have to do it. We have to believe in the true as what we know, and the false is what we don't know, but be open enough to resolve our true and then eliminate false as we come to it, and gradually we'll make the difference between true and false into something real. Now, I see Dennis just showed up, and it's great to have a philosopher in the room, because we've been talking philosophy with Manly P. Hall. Are you still here, Amber or Mel?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Do you want to get back to reading the next segment?
Okay. Sorry, I'm just finishing off a pear.
That's fine. I have some pears and apples that I got yesterday that look very tasty, and while you're talking, I might do just the very same thing.
Okay. So we're going on to the next section, which is called The Seven Wonders of the World. Many of the sculptors and architects of the ancient world were initiates of the mysteries, particularly the Eleusinian rites. Since the dawn of time, the truers of stone and the hewers of wood have constituted a divinely overshadowed caste. As civilization spread slowly over the earth, cities were built and deserted. Monuments were erected to heroes at present unknown. Temples were built to gods who lie broken in the dust of the nations they inspired. Research has proved not only that the builders of these cities and monuments and the sculptors who chiseled out the inscrutable faces of the gods were masters of their crafts, but that in the world today there are none to equal them. The profound knowledge of mathematics and astronomy, embodied in ancient architecture, and the equally profound knowledge of anatomy, revealed in Greek statuary, prove that the fashioners of both were masterminds, deeply cultured in the wisdom which constituted the arcana of the mysteries. Thus was established the Guild of the Builders, progenitors of modern Freemasons. When employed to build palaces, temples, or combs, or to carve statues for the wealthy, those initiated architects and artists concealed in their works the secret doctrine, so that now, long after their bones have returned to dust, the world realizes that those first artisans were indeed duly initiated and worthy to receive the wages of master masons. The seven wonders of the world, while apparently designed for diverse reasons, were really monuments erected to perpetuate the arcana of the mysteries. They were symbolic structures, placed in peculiar spots, and the real purpose of their erection can be sensed only by the initiated. Eliphas Levi has noted the marked correspondence between the seven wonders and the seven planets. The seven wonders of the world were built by widows' sons in honor of the seven planetary genii. Their secret symbolism is identical with that of the seven seals of Revelation and the seven churches of Asia. 1. The Colossus of Rhodes. A gigantic brass statue about 109 feet in height and requiring over 12 years to build, was the work of an initiated artist, Chares of Lindus, or Caries of Lindus, I'll spell it Chares. The popular theory, accepted for several hundred years, that the figure stood with one foot on each side of the entrance to the harbour of Rhodes, and that full-rigged ships passed between its feet, has never been substantiated. That actually reminds me, I'll have to interject there, of a Game of Thrones episode I was watching last night with the figure at the mouth of the harbour to Bravos. Okay, to go on with the work. Unfortunately, the figure remained standing but 56 years, being thrown down by an earthquake in 224 BC. The shattered parts of the Colossus lay scattered about the ground for more than 900 years, when they were finally sold to a Jewish merchant, who carried the metal away on the backs of 700 camels. Some believed that the brass was converted into munitions, and others that it was made into drainage pipes. This gigantic gilded figure, with a crown of solar rays, I do apologise. I'll just finish this paragraph and I'll ring the person back. Some believe that the brass was converted into munitions, and others that it was made into drainage pipes. This gigantic gilded figure, with its crown of solar rays and its upraised torch, signified occultly the glorious Son-Man of the mysteries, the universal saviour. Okay, I'm sorry, Lenny. I just need to ring this person back.
Gotcha.
So I just need to mute. We're back soon.
Not a problem at all. Just pop in when you otherwise can. This is the New Way on Steampunk Radio, which you're listening to on your TuneIn app. I'm Dr. Lenny Time. That's Mel from Amber's Place, reading Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. You can also find me on steemit.com with two E's, STEEMIT.com, at Lenny Time. Use the at symbol and then Lenny Time, and there you'll come into a page called No Way, where we get to say no way and write the crypto fiction that is the destiny of the future coming from the past of today. And some of the ideas expressed by the host in this episode may in fact turn up on the pages of Steam It eventually, just because that's the way it all works.
Lenny, and to the
Yes.
listeners, I apologise, but I have to leave early. Um, so thank you very much for having me on the show today, and I apologise for not being able to stay for the full length of the show.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you very much for reading to us. And it was a good session, and we'll pick up again with the Colossus of Rhodes next Thursday.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I'll speak to you later. Bye.
It comes to me that the terms of society may not have changed very much since the ancient times, but that the understanding of what those terms are now hidden and found through the school of hard knocks as opposed to taught in lessons in school. And the responsibility for educating children went from the family to the parents to the school system, and it really isn't a responsible system for bringing people up to be self-actuated and self-aware. And so I'd like to open the discussion to anyone in the chat room who'd like to comment on history and reality, and how much the lessons of history that we had burned into us might not be have anything to do with reality, but might just be episodes in another stage play that was written in the fiction of the past, now is told to us by Hollywood. So the lessons that we learn are not the same lessons that our parents would have taught us. And realize that I'm likely older than your parents. And so your parents are talking to their grandparents who might be my age. But when I was growing up, I was talking to my grandparents. And so my span is back beyond the turn of the 20th century. So there's a lot of historical knowledge that I carry with me that will definitely be lost in context, because it already is lost in context. And now with the Mandela effect changing things, we no longer have the ability to clearly and distinctly tell the past from the past that they told us was past. And so that's putting us on very, very shaky ground. And I don't feel terribly comfortable in an economic system based on bad logic and mistrust and non-truthfulness. So one of the ideas that I've been working on for quite a while is something called a faith and trust union. And a faith and trust union would be something like a credit union. But in order to get in, first you'd have to build faith and trust with individual members who are already there, and then they'd invite you, and then your ability to carry faith and trust would delegate how far you go in having the ability to spend the common for the benefit of the people. And if we had a common group of resources where the benefit of the people was the criteria for the use of the resource, then we could come to a committee of the whole, decide on the use of resources, and best direct our resources to values held by most of the people. But the individual always has to have the resources to keep themselves alive, and it's some basic comfort level, so that the comfort level is better than we are otherwise. Now, I saw earlier that T was mic'd in. Did you have something to add to the conversation, T?
Well, I just wanted to mention the symbol that she was describing at the end. It caused me to think of the Statue of Liberty. The rays coming out of uh, the symbol.
Okay. Yeah. The I believe that what we have historically been taught is different from what the individuals currently on the planet are currently being taught. And I don't have enough background in fields that are outside of my domain of interest to know how far it extends, but I have enough domains of interest in my own field to recognize that the reality that I take on isn't quite the reality of what exists, because my imagination can take it forward quicker than the reality can keep up with the imagination. And so sometimes I lose track of how things work in the context of how everyone believes them working by putting together things in a different possible path. And I think that the Statue of Liberty, being representative of the Oracle of Delphi, might in fact it, it would help me more to understand. I wouldn't have considered it a while ago, but then no, the Colossals of Rhodes, not the Oracle of Delphi. See? The Colossals of Rhodes and the Statue of Liberty being symbolically the same but at different scales. Yeah, it's stuff repeating itself. I can definitely see that. The loops of time repeat and rhyme. And so when we get to go back to the future from here to the past, if we choose to go, because some of us are not going anywhere, it depends on the belief system of what you can take to be open and what you can take to be closed. And so often we have our system that's set with limits that we don't even understand that we're putting ourselves under limits. And the assumption of Einstein's space-time definitely requires that speed of light be constant, and we know that for a fact that it's not. And we also know that the speed of light is delineated in time, but frequency is also delineated in time. And so the speed of light relates to frequency in a way that different frequencies take on different speeds. And so the frequency that you resonate at creates a mindset, and the fractal that you are on is something that is related to quantum healing and related to quantum jumping. And so I'm glad I got Mel to explain quantum healing, but Dolores Cannon, there's some problems I have there. And it has nothing to do with her. She's a nice old lady. But the premise of where she's coming from is as crypto fiction in its beginning as the New Way radio show is crypto fiction in its beginning. And so it can be right, it can be totally true, but it has to be presented as fiction, because if it was presented as reality and taken as reality, it would disrupt the current society, and there's no substitution for the current society because we haven't been able to work out alternatives. There are alternatives in the video game universe, but gee, do we really want to get deeper into the computer instead of more out into the real world? Nature has different laws, and those nature's laws are not common laws of man, and common laws of man are not current laws of man, and we are bound by decree by previous thought, and now we're getting the underpinnings that The effect called the Mandela effect can shift the underpinnings of thought, and Google can just change a few documents and you can look it up and it'll say something different than you thought it said in the first place. And so we've had these resources of information on our books, total faith in believing, because we believed in the Gutenberg Bible and the printing press and the revolution it caused, exponential release of knowledge back in the Renaissance. And computer age and this overflow of knowledge subtly hidden from us, some of it hidden in plain sight, stuff that now is 100 years old because it was published 90 years ago and it's right. And so that as we get to older and older textbooks, we find that the old books have been burned and the new books are coming. And now we've got a technology that can make sure that what we call up on our screen is common to each of us because it's a fictional compilation of the average of everything, normalized out to fit in the world. But this is not a normal world. It's a mad world. And it's an extremely mad world because the people are going crazy on each other because they just don't know how to handle the ramped up energies that we've been given, because there's a need for ramped up energy to make the transition of time from one epoch to another. And we're doing this on numerous different fractal scales. So the very small scales are ascending, and the very big scales are descending. And so, just as the dinosaurs descended in their portion of time, which is probably another made up history, the people of this time will descend out of itself because it went into an Armageddon, and it'll take 2,000 years to restore ourselves from the Armageddon back to the point where we are today. But there's a branch off group going into the living earth, and the stewards of living earth, as the branch off group, will have a population and a planet to work on at an extremely large scale on a 26,000 year cycle. And what that means is that 26,000 years of mankind will happen in an 80-year period for just a very few people, because we're going to need a catch up because we got hit by that strange attractor from chaos theory. In 2012, things changed, and we are now, what, in 2019? 6 years past, 7 years past 2012. And so if we get into Fibonacci counting and we look at those years, 2013 was year number 1. 2014 was year number 1. 2015 and 2016 were year number 2. 2017, 2018, and 2019 together were year number 3. 2020 through 2024 will be year number 5, and 25 through 2032 will be year number 8. By the time we go from year number 8 to 2033 and year number 13, what we will have is a device to take us from linear into natural mathematics. And so the transformation will be one of, I don't know, it's going to be 100 years of advance in the next 3 years, and another 100 years of advance in the 5 years after that. And then it'll take 8 years for the next 100 years of advance. And then it'll take 13 years for the following 100 years of advance. And so we'll go into some very, very, very rapid advance in order to get the timeline solidified on a foundation that'll cement it for 26,000 years so that it comes up every 13th rotation as the live one. And maybe by the time we get around to being the next live one, we will have figured out a way not to Armageddon the planet because we'll have the living Earth pattern that's gone on for 26,000 years and the planet never has to Armageddon again. So even though it's exciting to go watching those adventure movies, the fact that we were excited and watched those adventure movies and integrated it so well meant that we were pretty much given a choice between Star Wars and Han Solo or staying on a living Earth and getting the history from the perspective of Indiana Jones. But Indiana Jones' Living Earth was really the Armageddon Earth. But behind that, going back into some of the history of how we got there from here, and I think the Indiana Jones stories were written after the movie, but I do not know what the movies were actually based on because I didn't read that set of stories. But the story that I think reality is currently based on as a fundamental foundation is the story called Foundation by Isaac Asimov. And it's a first book in a book of 3, and it's very, very good read. The current story that you might be seeing pushed upon people is called Ender's Game, and it's written by Orson Scott Card in the 1970s. And that might also be a very interesting book to read because the traumatic experience of a child being duped into playing a video game, throwing a race, and going mad is quite the premise for a novel, and it didn't come out right in the movies. But then you could go back, and the movie they really want you to believe might be Atlas Shrugged, a 3-part movie from 2010 on the virtues of selfishness from Ayn Rand. And Atlas Shrugged was a good page novel. The first 2 movies, they had followed the novel pretty well. But I never did get to see the 3rd movie, and by the time to see the 3rd, enough people told me of their disappointment that I didn't want to destroy the story by watching the 3rd movie. So I haven't seen it. But, when they take a movie like Dune and they make the first 200 pages into an hour and a half of the movie, and then they take the next 700 pages and do it in the last half hour, it just doesn't work. And people want things to be entertaining on a short time frame so that they can get on with their lives. But the meaning of life is more than working and entertaining, or so we think. You can watch Monty Python and see the meaning of life. And, I always thought it was funny, but maybe it's true. Maybe the meaning of life, according to Monty Python, is way, way true from where we're at. It strikes me that I have been away from modern reality long enough that every example that I brought up is probably from pre-life of anybody 30 years old or so. Anybody under 30 probably has no idea what I was talking about, except they wrote down the names of the books and they say, yeah, I might check into this. There was another book that I referred somebody today to on another channel called Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson. And Crash has to do with the melding of humanity and artificial intelligence into a cumulative reality where one of the characters takes a bad drug and has his mind wiped, and the other characters go deep into the rabbit hole to figure out what happened. And so if you like real good futuristic fiction, Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash is one of the first pieces of crypto fiction I'd recommend. He also did a book called Zodiac that came out before Snow Crash, but Zodiac vehicle that water, not about the Zodiac of we have been talking about. That team at large in the situational mad world, and that's where they're changing the story and everybody into an exciting to transform every into a space program, and because we have to question whether we even went to the moon in the first place, given that the technological advancement of the time not progressed to space travel would have been made on a continuous basis. Once they did that they could morph into space travel by getting there from here, they're not going to get there from here. They're going to do the quantum jump thing. And the quantum jump thing is something that everybody should be ready to experience, because it's a changing of your current reality into something you never expected. Expected it because you've seen it in a vision or in your dream, and you didn't believe it, just wouldn't allow out there beyond the thing. But they're out there. But if you leave here, you have to know how to get back to the here that is here now. Leave to get there. In the conversations we've had over the last month or two, I realize that that's related to the Planck constant. And the Planck constant, 10 to the minus 34, is this infinite range of small that is conception of humanity that has down to the level of one, because we can't conceive of anything beyond that Planck constant, and it's a limit where your reality blinks out and then you blink back into the next reality, and if you're on the trajectory that you were back into the same place. But I'm not sure that we don't change trajectories and get blinked into another place, and that all places are frequency dependent. And so that if you are in a place in time and space called now and here, that reality has other realities at different frequencies that are subtly altered from this reality, but still have a conscious you in that reality reacting to something generated at that frequency, and that adjacent frequencies receive adjacent inputs. But the fractal dimension of how fractals work is that fractals don't have to be adjacent to each other to reappear. And when you get the reappearance of a construct in fractal reality, it works the same way. It doesn't work exactly the same way, it rhymes. But as it rhymes, it follows the same pattern. And as that pattern gets repeated over and over and over, it gets etched into a reality. And creating a new reality means that there's new patterns that have to be developed in place of the old patterns. But if you can't let the old patterns go, you find yourself getting into one of those loops. And I'm confident that on a 24-hour human scale, there are a number of us in this current purgatory going through the same day, every day, on a cycle of a week to keep us disoriented so we don't recognize from week to week that they're changing the pattern subtly to get us at war with each other. The thing to do is to a point where you can get into a mental state where you're grounded below the reality of human and don't have to be excited by what's going on out in the real world, which is the world of the matrix, the holographic illusion. So I was out in the world of illusion, and I had an interesting interaction with a rock. And this rock, I'm sure, was alive. I did not notice the rock. It was a big landscape rock because I was standing in a line talking with other people waiting to get into a food bank with people who were not comfortable enough to go to the stores to do shopping for one reason or another. And I've been homeless since I foreclosed my house sometime around paying a resident me to float, and for a long time I was in my vehicle. And the residence that I'm at now is room and board in exchange for work. It's not a residence, but I've been here for a long enough time that it's home. And the agreement that I have to be here is with the land. Happy at how the hemp grow progressed from the perspective of the land, but the land is okay with me because it realizes that it worked because we gave it approval and it had to give me approval to be able to do this. And so there's been a land transformation that really the herd of elk that's usually here came out and stood beside some of the cottonwoods that were downed. And I could see that they were here because their hoof prints are in the land. And they looked out at the land where there had been maybe 13 cottonwoods over the course of 5 acres. Cottonwoods have been taken down, pulled out by their stumps, except one stump that we couldn't quite get out. And I can just feel the elk herd saying, "What the fuck?" And I can relate to them entirely. And I went and talked to Grandmother Tree and brought her another offering. I brought her some usnea, a form of lichen that grows around here. And I put it there as a healing gift, and I'll go back out to Grandmother Tree and spend a little time out there and see if I'm still going to stay here on this land or if I'm going to work to make this land a home base and go off and come back and go off and come back, because the world is going to change drastically. And I think they need an itinerant peddler, somebody who can go out and bring knowledge to different folks about what's going on and have connectivity in a world of total